Hello, SpongicX here with another video game review, and today we're going to look at Spongebob Squarepants The Cosmic Shake, a spiritual successor to Battle for Bikini Bottom, made by the same team who remade Battle for Bikini Bottom back in 2020, and wow, a new licensed SpongeBob game that's actually good? I mean, it's no doubt that while there are a few pieces of gold in SpongeBob's gaming career, with the most praise being the home console ports of Battle for Bikini Bottom or the movie video game, SpongeBob has had a lot of lousy video game tie-ins over the years, and there once was a time where they were just like milking out all these, and so you don't see SpongeBob games as often as you used to, and so the fact we finally got another one since the remake of Battle for Bikini Bottom, and it just goes to show how good Battle for Bikini Bottom's formula was. I hated it every time Nickelodeon tried making a new SpongeBob game and they strayed away from the formula and the controls of Battle for Bikini Bottom. It just left such a high mark that every time they tried something different, it left fans underwhelmed. And so, well, I wouldn't go as far as to say Cosmic Shake is a flawless game. I wouldn't even say it's better than Battle for Bikini Bottom. It's still a fun successor, and Battle for Bikini Bottom was made before the first movie came out, so a lot of the references in that game were only based on the first 3 seasons, and considering how SpongeBob has like gone on to like 13 seasons still going, I can't really think of any video game since the release of Battle for Bikini Bottom that made any references to any episodes between seasons 4 through 13. So the fact that Cosmic Shake actually does it, it tries its best to make a modern SpongeBob game that appeals to all phases of SpongeBob, from the classic 3 seasons to the revival seasons, all the way up to the more recent post-season 9 episodes. So yeah, it's no secret that I'm not a fan of the modern SpongeBob seasons 10 through 13, especially. There are occasionally a few decent episodes, but most of them are just too hyperactive, brain dead. They have like no good writing and rely way too much on gross out humor or very desperate attempts at callbacks and trying to appeal to meme culture. The current run of SpongeBob just feels soulless and corporate. It just has no energy and feel to it like it used to. It's just hyperactive, brain dead nonsense. I don't know. I just don't like it. Luckily, the Cosmic Shake avoids a lot of what ruins SpongeBob nowadays and does a great job at reminding me of why I love the show to begin with. I honestly wish the current show was written more like the Cosmic Shake. Unlike the current show, this game's writing actually made me laugh a number of times. The Cosmic Shake does indeed have a lot of callbacks to previous SpongeBob episodes and moments, but it does it in a fun and natural way. It doesn't feel like it's just like constantly like hammering in your head, ha ha ha, remember this episode, buy our merchandise. It doesn't feel so corporate like modern SpongeBob is. I don't know, but the show just feels desperate for attention and fan approval. And so I like how this one, it does it more naturally, and it fits in with the plot of the game, actually. So, yeah, this game just includes a lot of fun locations that change things up, and it has a lot of new characters that you didn't even see in Battle for Bikini Bottom, or a lot of other 3D SpongeBob games for that matter, like Pearl or Karen. So, the gameplay itself is really fun, too. The story involves SpongeBob getting tricked by a mermaid named Madame Cassandra. Cassandra stole some magic bath soap from King Neptune, and she wanted to use it to try breaking the fabric of reality and collect some cosmic jelly as a power source, so she wanted to use it to mold the world to her liking, I guess, but the soap can only work on those with pure hearts, so when she sees SpongeBob, she realizes he could be the one who can finally break reality and get her the cosmic jelly she needs. And so she sells SpongeBob the soap, telling SpongeBob he can grant wishes with the bubbles. SpongeBob starts blowing bubbles around his house, and he just starts making wishes for all of his friends and neighbors in Bikini Bottom, and so, SpongeBob blows just a little too many bubbles to the point where reality breaks, and SpongeBob's friends around him get sucked into a portal that leads to other dimensions, and his world is warped and taken over with cosmic goo, and all these monsters made of jelly are taken over. And so, due to one of Patrick's wishes, where he wished for balloons and all that, it somehow caused Patrick to turn into a talking balloon, a star-shaped balloon, and so, it's basically an excuse to have Patrick tag along with you and make banter throughout the game. So think of him like Navi from The Legend of Zelda, except he's actually funny and not as annoying. I'll at least say Navi was probably a little more helpful though, but so he's just a way to make the game a little more funny since SpongeBob doesn't have a whole lot of characters to interact with throughout. Like there are characters to interact with, but they're mostly for like missions. So Patrick's just a way for SpongeBob to have someone to talk to throughout the game, I guess. And um, so Cassandra continues to trick SpongeBob into thinking she's helping him when she's clearly got some evil motives brewing. So Cassandra gives SpongeBob costumes based on past episodes that help give a hint on where SpongeBob needs to go to next. And luckily, this game does a good job at letting you know where you need to go next. There's usually like a little flower icon like in the distance that acts as kind of like a beacon to let you know like where to head next. So I have heard that some people got lost in Battle for Bikini Bottom. Because it's like an open collectathon game. Some people had no idea where to head next, and they know they need to get more golden spatulas, but they have no idea where to look. And so I think this game does a good job at trying to make it where it doesn't overwhelm players or make them lost as easily. So it's a nice little addition for that, I guess. So as SpongeBob travels to each world, one of SpongeBob's friends or one of Bikini Bottom's locations or buildings are trapped somewhere in the level's end, and SpongeBob has to find them and send them back home with the magic bubble soap. And so the story is very wacky, and it fits the show's nautical nonsense-filled tone. The game is sprinkled with fun cutscenes and character interactions that keep players awake and laughing throughout. I'll even say the writing in this game is probably the best I've seen in any SpongeBob game. It's not very consistent, though, but it knows how to make fun character interactions, and I will say, though, the timing on the cutscenes and music is very off a lot of the times. Some cutscenes just abruptly end. They're, like, 1 minute, there's, like, a cutscene, it feels like it just ends abruptly, and all of a sudden you're back to the gameplay. It just feels so sudden. There are characters constantly talking over each other. It's almost Sonic Adventure 2 levels of bad. Um, and then, like, there are times where, like, the narrator's speaking, then meanwhile, Patrick's, like, shouting at the top of his voice, so you can't hear what's going on because they're both talking at once. Yeah, the audio timing on this was very bad. There's even times where, like, two different audio tracks of the level's music are playing, like, at the same time. It feels like they were supposed to mute one of them to have another one take over, kind of like in Banjo-Kazooie, but it doesn't work in this case. They just play them both at once, and so, yeah, sometimes the audio in this game can be kind of annoying. The game has a great selection of music, though. Like, a lot of it is stuff you've heard throughout the show. You hear that throughout the cutscenes of the game. Sometimes they do feel out of place for the setting or event happening on screen, or they get cut off way too quickly. Otherwise, the animations are a huge improvement over Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. It uses, like, the same models for the characters, same textures, but the expressions and animation do feel like a step up. The characters are much more zany and expressive, but not overboard like modern SpongeBob, thank goodness. I don't think the graphics are that great, though. Like, there are times where they look really good. Like, the characters can look really detailed, like how you can see the pores on SpongeBob, or you can see, like, little fur textures on Sandy. It's like, that stuff is great, but it's very inconsistent. Sometimes you see textures, like, struggling to load in on time, especially, like, when it's switching from one view of a scene to another. It takes a while for this stuff to render even on Xbox Series S, and that was a problem that Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated even had. So, I don't know. It's like the game could have been optimized a lot better, but it's not an ugly-looking game, though. It's very colorful. I'd say the darker levels look better, though. Usually the dark levels have, like, a little bit of light, like, shining on the characters, so it helps give, like, a really cool effect, but I hate the levels where it's, like, you're in bright sunlight. Like, I remember one of the worst shots in the game was in the medieval level when you first meet Princess Pearl, and, like, the light is shining on her so intensely you can barely see her, and, like, that scene lasts for quite a bit. Like, there's a number of seconds wasted on that camera angle, and I'm like, oh my god, that lighting is annoying. And so, I don't know. I kind of miss, like, the simplistic lighting you got in old GameCube games or something. I kind of wish to see, like, improved versions of those instead of this simulated, realistic, Unreal-like lighting you see in most every games nowadays. It just looks so distracting. I hate all this, like, lens flare and, like, burning sunlight you get reflecting off characters. It just, you know, I like games where you can take a screenshot and you can actually make out what the characters look like, and you can barely do that in a lot of modern games because of the intense sunlight throughout, and I kind of wish I could find a good compromise of realistic but exaggerated, or not so intense lighting, you know? I really miss the simplicity of GameCube lighting, to be honest, but the gameplay is very similar to Battle for Bikini Bottom, but with a lot of changes and additions and some removals. Unfortunately, SpongeBob is the only playable character this time, so you don't get to play as Sandy or Patrick anymore, or any new characters for that matter. Very unfortunate. SpongeBob's moveset has been drastically improved to try implementing a few of Sandy and Patrick's abilities. Mostly Sandy's, I'd say, because in Battle for Bikini Bottom, Sandy had a lasso, which allowed her to hover and swing across certain floating objects. So SpongeBob early on in the game gets the ability to hover through the air using a Krusty Krab pizza box. A fun reference to the scene in the pizza delivery episode where he used the pizza as a parachute. But that's the thing, he used the pizza as a parachute. And so it feels kind of lazy here, how it feels like they meant to do that, but they got too lazy and just had it where he's floating around with just a pizza box as a glider. You should have saw an animation of like the pizza spouting out and poofing like a parachute, you know? So it does feel kind of awkward to see SpongeBob floating around with an empty pizza box. And SpongeBob also randomly gets an ability to have what I'd call a literal hook shot, where there are some fisherman hooks that are floating through the air, and SpongeBob all of a sudden has like a rope that he can use to latch onto it and swing across. It's much faster than Sandy's swinging from Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated even. So yeah, it's a way to have him like swing around. And he also gets an airborne karate kick attack that works very similarly to Sonic's homing attack in many of the 3D Sonic games. With this, SpongeBob is allowed to kick off of enemies, kick off balloons, and even wall jump on certain surfaces. And a really cool ability. I wish it was a little more rapid. It's a lot slower pace compared to Sonic's homing attack. So like you can't just rapidly press it and do like a chain of it. You do it slowly, but it's still a really cool ability. It's like, wow, I wish this was in Battle for Bikini Bottom even. And it was definitely my favorite new ability in the game. Now, comparing Patrick's abilities from Battle for Bikini Bottom, Patrick was able to pick up objects and throw them to hurt enemies or activate switches, even create stacks of platforms for a limited time. And in this game, the throwing mechanic is somewhat still here, but not quite to the extent that it was in Battle for Bikini Bottom. It's less repetitive, it's no longer used for combat or hurting enemies, and it's barely used in the game for that matter. There were only like 2 mini games where I recall SpongeBob being able to pick up things and throw them on a certain spots. Like one of them, you had to like put all these pieces of cake on a table while avoiding a witch who's chasing after you. Yeah, really random, I know. And then another one, you had to clean up Bikini Bottom because Plankton apparently framed SpongeBob for littering around the place. So you're forced to pick up all these trash and recyclables, and you have to put them in their respective place under a time limit. I don't know why there was a time limit for that part. There was really no need for that, but so otherwise, you can't carry items to use as platforms anymore, but I'm honestly really thankful for this implication. I thought that was one reason why Patrick's gameplay was my least favorite in Battle for Bikini Bottom. I was sick of all the puzzles that relied on carrying and throwing things or placing things on certain sensors, and it got very tiring and very repetitive, so thank goodness they cut most of that out. SpongeBob's controls are very similar to Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. He even reuses like the same idle animations, and his controls and jumping is very similar. But most of his abilities are different this time around. It's like the only ability he has that retains the same maneuverability from the first one, aside from jumping and walking, is his bubble wand spin attack. He still has a ground pound, but it acts more like a butt stomp, and it's much faster than the sluggish one he had in Battle for Bikini Bottom. SpongeBob's uppercut helmet attack is unfortunately gone, but there aren't many airborne enemies this time around, so you really don't need an attack to attack enemies directly above you anymore. I still kind of miss the uppercut from the movie video game, though, and the most sorely missed abilities are the Bubble Bowl and Bubble Missile attacks. And they do have like one ability that's kind of like a replacement for both of them, and it just doesn't make up for it. So SpongeBob gets an ability where he can basically throw a bubble ball from a bubble wand. I think it's called the Bubble Throw ability, and it's a very slow attack. It only homes in on switches. It doesn't home in on enemies, and the aiming for it is pretty bad when it comes to trying to lock onto one out of many particular like, I remember how in Glove World there's a part where you had to do, like, a target practice mini game, and the aiming on that was really bad. It's very useless in combat. It's only used to trap enemies, but it's like you can easily defeat enemies without needing to trap them, so it just feels like a useless ability. Uh, Now, I know that the Bubble Bowl was pretty wonky in Battle for Bikini Bottom. It didn't have very good controls or collision physics, but I still would have loved to have seen a revised improvement of that ability, one that works better. And the Bubble Torpedo is really missed in this game. I miss being able to just like launch that in first person and guide it to blow up on things, and can't do that anymore. It's such a shame. SpongeBob no longer has the sponge ball ability where he could roll up into a ball and compete in like little time challenges or physics-based puzzles. And to be fair, the physics during those parts were very wonky, so I don't really miss that. I already mentioned how I thought the karate kick and literal hookshot abilities were great, but I kind of wish those were just abilities that were added to the moves we already had in Battle for Bikini Bottom instead of replacing a lot of those abilities. The pizza glide ability is a neat idea, but it messes up a lot of jumps I meant to do. Because it's triggered as long as you're holding the jump button. Usually in a game like this, you'd have to at least double jump and hold it to trigger a glide. But no, even if you single jump and hold the jump button, it causes SpongeBob to glide. So there are times where I'm trying to get SpongeBob to jump a little higher instead of doing like a short jump, but I accidentally hold the button too long, so he pulls off a glide, and the glide forces him to move forward a little bit, even if you're not holding onto the control stick. So yeah, it takes a lot of getting used to. The game doesn't have the best use of drop shadows either, so sometimes trying to glide on the little tiny platforms is a lot trickier than it should be. It's not the worst gliding or platforming I've ever seen in a game, but there's definitely better out there. I'll say Sandy's platforming and hovering in Battle for Bikini Bottom was so much better in comparison. I don't feel like the gliding in this has very good range either. It feels like SpongeBob's like a lower, like he's dropping way too fast. Where I liked how Sandy's allowed her to stay like high up in the air for as long as she could until it wore out at least. But SpongeBob's it starts wearing out like way too fast. There is at least a meter in this game to let you know how much longer your gauge is. Very similar to like the glide gauge that you got in games like Zelda Breath of the Wild. While there are still collectibles in the game, they are no longer the main focus, as the game has a much more linear approach than Battle for Bikini Bottom. As long as you make it to the end, the level is finished. No need to constantly revisit levels to find golden spatulas, Goofy Goober tokens to keep pressing on. The main collectibles are Cosmic Jelly, which can be used to buy new outfits for SpongeBob. They're basically the replacement for the shinies that you collected throughout the games in Battle for Bikini Bottom, or the manly tokens you got in the movie video game. And the outfits in this game are very cheap, and Cosmic Jelly is very easy to collect, so you'll likely never be short on how much you need to get outfits. Like right now, like most often, like even after I buy like a new set of outfits, I still am up to like the 10 or 13,000 point range, and outfits only cost like 500 a piece. It's not like Mario Odyssey where some outfits are much more expensive than others. All of them cost 500, and it's way too easy to collect even more than 500 in one sitting. Um, so in order to buy new costumes, you have to rank up by collecting doubloons. Now, I'd say doubloons are basically the replacement for the golden spatulas in this game, but they're not for progression. They're just for unlocking new ranks to get more costumes. Each new rank gives you 4 new costumes you can buy. And I think I'm currently down to the final ranking. I need to collect like either 14 or 18 doubloons to collect the final rank of costumes. But so some of these doubloons are hidden really well in levels, and others just require later abilities or side missions. And most of the unlockables and side missions are just post-game content to repeat levels for more collectibles, get more costumes. They are really repetitive. It's like, for instance, after you save a certain character from a level, say like Mr. Krabs, he'll say, "Oh, he lost all of his pennies. Can you help find him?" So you revisit these levels, and they'll trigger new events where SpongeBob will say like, "Hey, maybe I'll find Mr. Krabs' pennies here," or let's say Squidward needs some kind of soda to get his voice back, and so he goes to the Western level and says, maybe I'll be able to find something to thirst Squidward's whistle or something, you know. And so, yeah, basically an excuse to go back and find more items, and then once you return those items to the characters back in the hub world, they'll give you a doubloon. So, yeah, it is pretty repetitive, but it is what it is. So, yeah, the costumes are great, but I wish the costumes came with enhancements for SpongeBob's abilities, and maybe even control enhancements as well. But The closest you get is that some of the costumes replace SpongeBob's bubble wand attack animation with other items or weapons. So, like his karate gear, it'll replace his bubble wand attack with a karate spin. Otherwise, it has like the same attack speed, the same amount of damage. It's just a nice little reskin of it, basically. So, yeah, and if you pre-ordered the game, you get 7 exclusive costumes, and I'm not sure if there's any way to get this if you didn't pre-order it. It is a shame if there's no way to actually buy this separately, but, so the costumes you get one that turns SpongeBob into a jelly monster, like the villains in the game. You get the Band Geek outfit, Primitive SpongeBob, Mermaid Man, SpongeBob, Dried Up SpongeBob, and, a miniature skin of the robot SpongeBob boss fight from Battle for Bikini Bottom. So, I hope down the line this game gets more costume DLC. A few more levels wouldn't hurt either. This game arguably has less levels than Battle for Bikini Bottom. But the levels aren't bad, though. Like, most of them last about an hour. But the game starts off really slow. Like, there's barely anything to do at first. SpongeBob can only move and jump. And I honestly wish there was a way for him to move a little faster, but there really isn't. But, so as the tutorial progresses, he starts learning other abilities like hovering and attacking, which makes the gameplay a lot more fun. So the levels are fun, but can feel a bit formulaic. You're constantly halted by other characters needing you to find like 5 or 18 of some kind of item in order to progress, or sometimes even compete in mini games. So it kind of has like a Spyro the Dragon formula. The main platforming gameplay is still very fun. Most of the levels feel like drastic overhauls of previous locations and levels from Battle for Bikini Bottom. The first level has us trying to rescue Mr. Krabs from a westernized version of Bikini Bottom. A Wild Western version, I should say. And so Krabs tries blending into the world by becoming a bandit crab in disguise who steals the town's cactus juice supplies, and Sheriff Sandy wants your help to turn him in. So speaking of which, while the game setting is fun, the setup for a lot of these worlds make no sense at all. They try acting like we're in a multiverse, so you think everyone you meet would be a different variant of all the characters SpongeBob knows in his life, but at the same time, they're revealing that the real versions of SpongeBob's friends are indeed in these worlds, and so it can be kind of hard to... It's like, it makes you wonder, how can SpongeBob tell right away, like, which versions are the ones from his world and which ones aren't? Just because Cassandra said so? I don't know. It's kind of weird. So, yeah, and so even if that were the case, it makes you wonder why you don't see more variants of certain characters. So, you have, like, the real Patrick accompanying you throughout the world because he's your companion. He turned into a balloon, but that doesn't excuse why you don't see alternate versions of Patrick in these worlds. And, and it's clear that a lot of these levels are inspired by previous specials or episodes of SpongeBob. Like, this Western level is clearly inspired by Pest of the West, the Western-themed episode. So, it makes you wonder why they didn't just reuse the theme of that. This is not the same setting, just by how it's basically the same thing. Because in that episode, it was called, I think it was called Bikini Gulch. And here, it has a completely different setting. I can't even remember the name. But, like, the buildings look different. The characters... like, you still have Mrs. Puff in that world, but it's not the same. Like, she's like a horse instructor. She teaches people how to drive horses. So that was a fun substitute for her. Instead of having a boating school, she has a horse steering school. That's kind of funny, but compared to how she was implied to be like a show performer at the saloon and the Pest of the West episode. So it's like, why didn't they just use the same character roles? And so instead of Plankton being the villain in this world, it's more like Mr. Krabs, and I don't know, it's kind of confusing, but otherwise, some of the character roles were kind of cool. Like, I liked how Sandy was the sheriff of that town. That made a lot of sense, but so yeah, either way, the plotting for this game is really confusing. It's like, how come some levels have like alternate versions of this character when others don't? So it would have been cool to see like alternate versions of each of SpongeBob's friends in each level, similar to how Sonic Prime did that. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's very inconsistent. So anyways, Sheriff Sandy is not the Sandy from SpongeBob's world, nor are the other Western versions of SpongeBob's friends. So Mr. Krabs is the only one you interact with in this level who is the real deal, but he's blending in because he decides he wants to be here because it's the only way he can get away with being a criminal, basically. And so SpongeBob basically has to chase Mr. Krabs down and bring him back to the real world by force. And so The Western level does indeed feel like a tribute to Pest of the West, but like I said, it doesn't take the same setting or characters. But I guess in a way, it is kind of convincing though, because it shows that they're not just lazily recycling from past levels. They're not retelling the same stories over and over. It shows that they are putting some creativity into it. So for that, it's a little bit forgivable, I guess. But a part of me kind of wishes you could have just had more stretched out versions of some of these episodes, or I don't know. But in a way, this game reminded me a bit of Creature from the Krusty Krab, but done right. Creature from the Krusty Krab was honestly the worst SpongeBob game I ever played, 3D platformer wise, and I mean the concept was great. You're exploring dream worlds, but there was only like what 4 levels to choose from, and they all went on way too long. It wasted its potential of very bland and repetitive levels and gameplay, and yeah, it just drags on forever. This game just does a much better job at placing the characters you know and love and placing them in familiar but new locations with very bizarre twists and turns and a lot of nostalgia throughout. And this was a much better Creature from the Krusty Krab than that game was, you know. But so overall, this level was a fun intro to the game. You even get a ride mystery, the seahorse. Riding seahorses plays very similarly to the sliding segments from Battle for Bikini Bottom, but more on rail. So a little bit easier, I guess, because you don't have to worry about falling off. There are some sliding segments in this game still, but those are for some of the later levels. Steering the seahorses is kind of hard to control, but it's still fun, especially during the train chase segment at the end. But for me, the highlight of this level was when you first meet Sheriff Sandy in a saloon, and you have to fight off a horde of jelly enemies that invade the place. And there's just something fun about seeing like SpongeBob smashing enemies into tables, just like a scene straight out of a spaghetti western saloon brawl. And so while level 1 was a fun intro to the game, level 2 was my personal favorite. It seems to be a variant of Downtown Bikini Bottom, but overhauled to feel like they're shooting a movie down there. So like right when the level starts off, you're going down like a really big red carpet, and you eventually run across Squidward, who is like a director, and he keeps like halting your progression because he thinks you're one of the actors in the movie, and so he's constantly trying to direct you. And so in this level, you're trying to rescue Sandy, who you think is in need of saving. So, like I said, Squidward mistakes you for the hero actor of his story, so he guides you through many set pieces, which are disguised setups for the game's objectives. And so out of all the games, like, you know, there's always going to be levels in games where, oh, in order to progress, you have to help this NPC. Oh, they'll only let you pass if you collect this amount of items, and that can always feel so forced. And I'd say out of all the levels, this one felt the most natural. I just loved how it was coming from Squidward's egotistical director's vision, you know. It almost made me think this should have been the level where you rescued Squidward from instead of Sandy. It would have been like you're trying to get him out of there, but he's so caught up in being a big movie shot director, you know, so a big shot movie director, I mean, and so it's like this level would have worked better for saving Squidward. You had to like get his movie done before forcibly taking him back. That would have made more sense. But so when SpongeBob has to fight off a lot of enemies throughout this level, it's because Squidward is shooting for an action scene. And there's even like an arcadic beat 'em up brawler segment where you have to keep moving right, but if you move too far off screen, you fail the mission. And but enemies keep coming in. You got to collect items along the way. It was fun. I liked that little segment. It was challenging because it was really easy to die during a few points, but it was still fun. So yeah, this was a fun way to disguise the game's formulaic mission structures that you see throughout the game. I felt like this was the only level that cleverly disguised it. So eventually you find Sandy at the end of the level. She's in her Karate Island Kill Bill outfit, and you're forced to fight her for the final battle of Squidward's film. Now, the setup was really cool. I was really looking forward to this part. It's like, oh my god, I've always wanted to see a video game where you actually gotta control SpongeBob and Sandy doing an actual karate match. Like, they always tease you in these games. Like, I remember all the way back to Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, like when Sandy challenged you to a karate match, but instead you're just doing a mini game where you had to smash the most objects. It's like, come on, let us actually have a moment where you actually have to fight her. Like, you actually have to use dodge abilities and time things right, and you never get that. You don't get like a quick hack and slash like gameplay of SpongeBob and Sandy karate chopping. I wish we could finally get that. And so I was really hoping this would be the game to finally do it, and I hate to break it to you, but no, it's really more of the same kind of boss fights you see throughout Battle for Bikini Bottom or this. Mostly, you gotta keep dodging attacks, wait for them to expose a weakness, and attack them before the weakness recovers. So, yeah, it's just more of the same. Some of these boss fights feel less like boss fights and more like mini games or platforming combat challenges. So, yeah, I just wish it was a plain one-on-one karate match against Sandy. That being said, though, Sandy's boss fight was still the most memorable one in the game. It was one of the most bizarre ones. She kept fighting around, she kept running around in like a giant, basically a giant boat steering wheel, but it had like spikes on it, and so she's running on it like a hamster wheel and trying to run you over, and you have to try tricking her into running over TNT dynamites, and then there's like a part where she flips it over to act like a giant flying saucer kind of, and she's just trying to ram you over with it. And it took me a while to figure out how to dodge that, but it turns out you just had to use the new dodge roll ability. Yeah, I forgot to mention there's a dodge roll ability now. It's barely needed though, but it's still pretty helpful for if you feel like there's too much coming at you at once and you need an extra boost to get out of the way. Yeah, it's helpful for that at least. But and then there's a part where she sends like a troop of bodyguards after you, and they're just like running in like a wall formation, and their attacks can be pretty hard to dodge as well, mainly due to how bad the camera angle is during that part. But otherwise, this was still the most standout boss fight for me. I just loved how crazy and fun it was, and I really wish it was just a plain martial arts match of SpongeBob versus Sandy. Very missed opportunity there, but still one of the best boss fights in the game. So after rescuing Sandy, SpongeBob leaves to find his pineapple house. He finds out it's trapped in a pirate-themed variant of Goo Lagoon, where he rescues Larry the Lobster and teams up with the Flying Dutchman to get his socks and his ship back from the evil Prawn. So yeah, Prawn was an obscure villain who was introduced in Battle for Bikini Bottom. I didn't care much for this level. It just felt like a typical pirate-themed level with nothing new added to it. There were a lot of repetitive moments. Like, I especially hated it how every time you found one of the Dutchman's socks, you had to haul it up on a boat like a sail, and you had to keep button mashing to do it. That was kind of tiring, but luckily, when revisiting these levels, I don't think you have to do that stuff again. So, a lot of this, like, slow stuff, a lot of the slower moments in the main gameplay is skippable once it comes to replaying the level, thank goodness, but I did love how Prawn fought by firing explosive pie bombs. It was a nice reference to the Dying for Pie episode. Now, the rock bottom level was fantastic. I didn't care for this level in Battle for Bikini Bottom, but what they did to redesign it in Cosmic Shake was fantastic. They turned it into a Halloween level, and so, like, the beginning of the level is very similar to the one in Battle for Bikini Bottom. Battle for Bikini Bottom was really annoying. It had I had like those stupid enemies where you had to sneak past them by tippy-toeing, and it was real easy to accidentally slip up during that. And then there were a lot of flimsy platformings where you had to tiptoe to get across them, and it was just a real sluggish level. And again, this level is mostly a stealth-based level, but it's more fun. It's less, less tight and flimsy platforming, and they're like these anglerfish enemies, and you have to sneak up behind them, and once you get close enough to them, you can scare them to defeat them. So that was cool. That was so much better than those stupid sleeping enemies where once you wake them up, they start firing lasers at you, and I don't know. I thought this level was just a more forgiving and fun version of stealth. But this level feels, it's just packed with Halloween-themed episodes. You've got references to, the Scaredy Pants episode, I Was a Teenage Gary, and so, by default, SpongeBob is dressed in his flower costume from the stop-motion Halloween special, but it's got a trick-or-treating, Halloween theme makeover, just like in Scaredy Pants, except now in Rock Bottom. And, there's some fun cameos here, too. You even meet Tom, the crazy chocolate fish, from, the Chocolate with Nuts episode, and so, there's a part where you're forced to go trick-or-treating because you have to get an entry fee in order to compete in a snail race or something. And so, while you're going trick-or-treating, eventually you come across Tom, the crazy chocolate guy. I thought that was kind of funny. And so, SpongeBob even gets turned to a snail at one point when he has to compete in the snail race. And so, it's basically a challenge where you have to button mash for SpongeBob to slowly crawl up, all these slopes while dodging stuff. So, it's a funny little challenge, but so, in this level, SpongeBob is searching for Gary and is convinced that a monster took him. But once you make it to the Rock Bottom Museum, so yeah, I was surprised that location returned. That was exclusive to Battle for Bikini Bottom's version of, um, Rock Bottom. So the fact they brought that back, but it had a complete makeover because all the paintings were taken down and replaced with pictures of Gary from actual episodes of the show. That was kind of cool. But so eventually, SpongeBob finds out the monster they were looking for was in fact Gary. Gary somehow turned into a giant monster king snail, and Gary was a pretty challenging stealth-based boss fight. You had to constantly take cover and avoid his like laser eyes and his acid spit. And it's mostly just a boss fight where you had to keep dodging his attacks, and you had to keep like climbing up these staircase towers and destroying these vending machines that gave Gary his candy that he needed for power. And yeah, it's a crazy boss fight. And so eventually, SpongeBob finds that Squidward is in prehistoric times, so we have to go through a level that's clearly inspired by SpongeBob BC and SB129. I really wanted to like this level. I always love prehistoric settings in video games or movies, and so I was looking forward to seeing a prehistoric level of SpongeBob. And why is it that a lot of dinosaur levels always turn out underwhelming for me? It's like they sound so promising, but then it's like there's barely any prehistoric life in these levels, or it's mostly just levels with dried rocks and canyons and a lot of tar. And I hate how bland these levels are. Whether it's Banjo-Tooie or Conker's Bad Fur Day, I wish there was more excitement to these dinosaur levels. And so, unfortunately, this kind of falls into the latter of an underwhelming dinosaur level. There's like no dinosaurs to interact with. There's like one of those giant like whale creatures that acted as SpongeBob's alarm clock. You have to. There's a challenge where you had to scare off all these jellyfish that are surrounding it, and otherwise this level mostly relied on long sliding segments and segments where you have to roll on top of a boulder to get across lava. And so Squidward is held captive by a cave woman version of Pearl. And it's basically just like one of those things where you have to avoid her attacks, and she keeps like creating all these giant waves after like jumping up and down on the ground. So very similar to like Bug of the Nut from Conker, how he keeps jumping, creating like all these earthquake waves, and so you have to keep dodging those attacks, and you got to find openings so where you can attack like the stuff that's like holding the platform she's standing on until she's defeated. So very repetitive boss fight. And so next we have to save the actual Pearl from medieval times in a level that's heavily inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. Again, I kind of wish they just took the setting from that game and retold that story in a playable form with extended content. It would have been fun to see like some of the same characters, and like you don't get the giant dragon jellyfish, unfortunately. You don't get Plankton as an evil wizard. It's like Pearl and Squidward are like some of the only characters I remember actually appearing in this. Squidward was like the guard of, well, he was like the gateway guard in preventing you from going inside the castle, and Pearl is just portrayed as the spoiled princess who doesn't want to leave this world, and she kicks you out. Like early on the level, you're going down like all these giant sliding segments across rainbows and clouds. You find Princess Pearl. She doesn't want to leave. She kicks you out and throws you far away from the castle. So SpongeBob and Patrick have to find a way to get back into the castle and bring her back home. And so it's mostly just a long, drawn-out quest just to get back inside the castle, which you were at to begin with, but you got thrown out so quickly. So yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of that level. I really wanted to like it, though. I like the setting, though, but I wish it was a little more exciting story-wise. It was no Dunces and Dragons, that's for sure. Like, Dunces and Dragons was just a fun episode showing, like, what it would be like for SpongeBob and Patrick to be in, like, a world similar to Dungeons and Dragons, and I didn't get that kind of charm with this level, and I was really hoping I would have, but so the final level was a welcome one that was teased early on in the game, for that matter, Glove World. So it's nice to finally see a video game where Glove World is an actual level. This is a more morbid version of it, so it kind of gave me Epic Mickey vibes, how that whole game is like you're in warped versions of, Disney park locations. And so Patrick disappears in this level, so SpongeBob needs to find both him and the Krusty Krab, who are hidden at the end of this level. And there's a lot of familiar locations in this level that are straight from a lot of the Glove World inspired episodes. There's like the mitten ride that you actually get a ride for a little mini game. It's optional, but you just have to slowly go across like a roller coaster and jump to collect like these little tokens, and if you win, you get a doubloon. They even have the Tunnel of Glove from the Tunnel of Glove level, and that's like a long part of the level. Like you gotta keep platforming across like all these different little boats hopping across the river, and um, so, too bad there was no Fiery Fist of Pain segment. That's quite unfortunate. But there even is a reference to one of the later episodes. I wasn't a fan of this level, but there is a boss, not a boss, but there is an enemy gauntlet part where you have the 5 waves of enemies, and you have to do that in Glove World Jail. Like, there's a whole level, there's a whole episode where SpongeBob and Patrick got arrested and were sent to Glove World Jail. It was a really bad episode. I hear a lot of people say it was good. I thought it was terrible. But, so anyways, it turns out the villain of this level is Glovey Glove. He was like the Glove World mascot introduced in the Roller Cowards episode, and so he was the one who took Patrick. He grew a grudge over SpongeBob ever since he broke the fabric of reality, and so people would rather explore all these different portals of different worlds instead of return to Glove World. So Glovey got so tired of it to the point where he stole SpongeBob's best friend, basically, and like, Glovey is, like, really obsessive in this. Like, he is just, like, psychotic. It's kind of funny. It's just, like, a giant, glove mascot costume. Has, like, a permanent blank smile on his face. And he just sounds like a really pissed off Mickey Mouse, like, swearing at SpongeBob and vowing to get revenge on him. It was so unexpected, but so hilarious. And overall, this was a fun, morbid take on Glove World. And that boss fight against Glovey was just so funny and creepy at the same time. Did not see that coming. Speaking of not seeing something coming, let's talk about the final level. So, once all the levels have been completed, Neptune finally confronts SpongeBob for messing with his bubble soap, only for Cassandra to rise up with the power she got from all that cosmic jelly SpongeBob collected. And so, upon seeing Squidward's rage with SpongeBob for letting this happen, Cassandra decides to use Squidward as a vessel to use as a weapon against SpongeBob, and she transforms him into a giant Splatoon-looking like monster, and like, he looks like a boss fight straight from Splatoon, and so I was not expecting Squidward to be the game's final boss. Like, I was thinking this would just be a boss fight before the final boss, but to find out this was the final boss, it was kind of, it was pretty rushed and very underwhelming, I'm not gonna lie. It was a funny idea for a boss fight, but for a final boss fight, it was really underwhelming. You only have to hit him like 3 times. Again, it's another boss fight where you gotta keep dodging things. Like, Squidward constantly waves his tentacles around and creates a bunch of dark shock waves. You gotta avoid them, and you gotta use a reef blower to suck up enemies and fire them back at Cassandra. You do it like 3 times and the boss fight's over. And so, yeah, it was pretty short, very easy, and very underwhelming. Upon defeating Cassandra, a lot of her magic wears off. Patrick returns back to normal. Neptune patches up the tears in reality. And so, for stopping Cassandra, Neptune thanks SpongeBob and offers him one wish, which Patrick wastes because he gets too excited, says how much fun this adventure was, and says he wishes they could do it all over again. Everyone shouts, "No!" as reality gets torn again, and the game abruptly ends with the credits. And so during the credits, we get to hear a full untrimmed version of Sweet Victory from the Band Geeks episode and the Jellyfish Jam theme from Jellyfish Jam. And so there's just something so fitting and rewarding about hearing Sweet Victory play at the end of a game. It just felt so fitting to play upon the victory of completing a game, just hearing Sweet Victory. And so, overall, I really enjoyed the game. It's not perfect. It has a few flaws and many rushed moments, some unpolished visuals with awkward sound editing, but the gameplay setting, references, and humor were a lot of fun. The gameplay feels a lot less wonky than games like Battle for Bikini Bottom, luckily even the rehydrated version, and I look forward to going back and trying to find all the post-game collectibles, and I really hope we get more games like this, whether SpongeBob or not, but yeah, I'd love to see more SpongeBob games like this. Like, this is the formula of SpongeBob that works the best. The 3D platforming that was introduced in Battle for Bikini Bottom and brought over in the movie video game. I'll never understand why they stopped. Like, there were even attempts to try to bring it back, but they just failed. Like, I hated how slow Truth or Square felt in comparison. I felt the levels were really bland. It felt like it was recycling what the past games did, but making the levels so generic. There just weren't any fun like locations or characters to interact with like there were in Battle for Bikini Bottom, and I feel like this game did a much better job at bringing it back. It was a little too linear though, but the moments where you did feel like you were like in a town, like I really liked how the Western level, there was like that one moment where you're in like a town setting, you get to go inside buildings and interact with the characters. That was fun. I wish the game had more moments like that, but at least that's what helped helped you remember like one level over another when it did have things like that. And I felt like moments like that were missing in games like Truth or Square, where they were present in games like Battle for Bikini Bottom. And even so, yeah, I'm glad to finally see a SpongeBob game that does live up to the legacy of Battle for Bikini Bottom. This was a great game, very fun. I'd give it an 8 out of 10, and I hope to see more down the line. Well, that's all I have to show for now. Thank you for watching. See you next time, and have a great day.